everyone. I am Javera Kulsum Atif, digital media and policy advocacy expert here at IPRI. I'm joined here today by Dr. Bruno Macaes. Dr. Bruno, how have you been?
Very good. It's a pleasure to be in Pakistan as always. Not my first time, but there's always so much to see.
It's a pleasure to be hosting you for Margala Dialogue this year. Um, I'm just interested to know your thoughts on several events that have been going on and what are your predictions about the outcome of those events. So let's just jump right into the most happening event. And even last night, we heard about a missile incident that went into Poland's airspace. So, what are your predictions regarding the Russia Ukraine war? Where are we headed?
Unpredictable, as you say. If someone had told me a year ago or 2 years ago that we'd be discussing a possible attack on a NATO member, Poland, as opposed to Ukraine, is a NATO member. And yesterday there were, of course, news of an explosion in Poland near the border, still being discussed where exactly that explosion originated, whether it was a missile from Russia, but it could potentially also be the result of an intercepted missile by the Ukrainian forces. President Biden just said that. So the lesson here is to be very cautious. The war continues to be unpredictable. It could escalate, and one way it could escalate is by bringing in other countries and other locations, just as yesterday seemed to be the case. Of course, there's the nuclear question that is always being raised. So difficult to make predictions, but what we know is that Ukraine is now on the offensive, recovering many of its territories. And I think the issue of whether Russia can win the war is one of the most clear issues in this war that I don't think it can anymore. Ukraine is prepared, it is self-confident, it is fighting for its own survival against a foreign invader. These are the determinants of the war. Now, how far can this Ukrainian effort go is the question we're all asking. Can it recover all its territories? Will there be a Russian collapse? What follows a Russian collapse? These are all very big questions that don't just involve Europe, but really the whole world. They are global questions, not just the nuclear security question, but also the future of the Eurasian supercontinent as a whole is at stake in this war.
Drawing from your point on the Eurasian continent, we've seen China-Russia partnership come. We've basically seen it grow. And especially in Ukraine, we also saw China not outrightly basically being against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But we've also noticed in recent days that China is somewhat hesitant to support it outrightly as well. So what do you say will be the impact on their partnership given the events are happening?
Yes, you're right. I think China is very reluctant to intervene directly. If it intervenes on Ukraine's side, I think Chinese officials think that it would be helping the United States. And as they say, why should you help your main rival? And why should you help a country that is always saying it is interested in containing your own influence and your own power? So China will not be helping Ukraine, but it's also clear that China will not be helping Russia. Why? Because I think Chinese officials are now convinced that Russia cannot win the war, as we just talked about. And why would Russia be interested in being dragged into a war that cannot be won on Russia's side? So China will remain distant and trying to benefit from the war from a distance. I don't see any strong partnership between China and Russia at the time. I'm convinced myself that China is quite angry at the way Russia has conducted this war. And of course, you could say that Russia is paying a price as well. The United States has regained a lot of influence, and that's not something that China will be very happy about.
Drawing from that point again, what lessons would then China have when it comes to its case on Taiwan? I think in the initial days as well, everyone was just drawing conclusions about what could be the possible situation in Taiwan later on.
I find it difficult to argue that you can draw very direct lessons. They are so different, the cases. The history, the political circumstances. One is an island, the other is a neighbor with the largest, longest border between two countries in Europe. I think the psychology of the two countries is very different, Ukraine and Taiwan. The history of the conflict, the dispute is different. The reactions from American allies would be different. America's goals would also be different. America said it will intervene directly in the case of Taiwan. That's already a very significant difference. If it was
Right.
clear at the beginning that America would intervene directly in Ukraine, I would imagine probably there would have been no invasion.
Right.
So I don't make many comparisons, except to say that it's one more lesson that, as Machiavelli liked to say, you can start wars with full control, your own choice, your own discretion, but the way to end them is much more complicated. But I think
Definitely.
Chinese officials know this. They will not quote Machiavelli, they will quote Sun Tzu, but the lessons are the same and they're there as well.
Right. And so, since we've mentioned US and China now, I would like to know that what do you see the role of technology when it comes to the great power competition that we're seeing? Is it technology that's driving the destabilization, or is it the other way around?
No, I think technology is driving destabilization. I know you also want to ask me about my next book, and this is my next book, is the connection between power and technology.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I see it, technology has now become central to geopolitical competition.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be the case that geopolitics was about the control of physical territory.
Mm-hmm.
Now geopolitics is much more about the building of new virtual territories.
Right.
We saw that already very clear with the question of 5G,
Mm-hmm.
that I am sure was discussed in Pakistan a lot, the question of Huawei, Huawei's presence. You remember that Americans officials used to say, we cannot allow China to build the world of the future. Otherwise, we will be living in a Chinese world.
Exactly.
It's almost a discussion of science fiction that has arrived, because when you say we'll be living in a Chinese world, what you mean is the worlds of the future are completely artificial.
Mm-hmm.
They are human built, they are technological, and the forms of power are very different too.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is correct that if you build the artificial worlds of the future, then you are in full control. You know how these worlds work, you have access to the control boards of these worlds, you have what computer programs call root access to the system.
Mm-hmm.
You have an ability to surveil, you have an ability to process data. So geopolitical competition has become very much about who has the capacities to build the world of the future according to which rules. If you have to build in a world that others, you have to live in a world that others have built, of course, this is not a world that you find pleasant. It's not your world, it's
Mm-hmm.
not the world that you would build. It is a very radical kind of power, and you see this competition for technological power now everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
The disputes between America and the US is about Taiwan, but remember, Taiwan is a lot about semiconductors.
Definitely.
And we saw last month on October 7th, the US took a series of measures that were aimed at destroying the Chinese semiconductor industry. We don't have the Chinese response, but it's the very best indication that competition now is about who controls technology.
But again, since you mentioned your book and you've practically, informed us now what
Right.
the readers can expect from it. In Pakistan, when we were looking at the great power competition from our side of the lens,
Right.
we're willing to adapt to what China is saying, and we're also willing to listen to what the US is saying. But then when it comes to the technological part, and that is where the difficulty arises, right? You have two parallel systems functioning. From you being an outsider, how do you envision or how do you see this panning out for Pakistan within Eurasian dynamics, even?
Pakistan has been at the center of these dynamics. So last time I came to Pakistan, my main interest back then was the Belt and Road Initiative and the CPEC,
Mm-hmm.
China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And Pakistan was right at the center. You could see how the Belt and Road would evolve by looking at Pakistan. I think now there are other issues that are more central to the contemporary discussion. That one has not gone away, but it is a very rich set of events, and I've written about other things too. The technological question is also, in many respects, very connected to Pakistan, particularly when it comes to green technology.
Mm-hmm.
Together with semiconductors, green technology is one of those examples of how the world is being rebuilt.
Mm-hmm.
You have to remember that the current fossil fuel economic structure was a radical revolution in the way human beings live. nothing stayed the same after the 18th, 19th century. Our world was rebuilt from the ground up to operate according to this new economic and energy paradigm. And now we'll have to do it again. We have to get rid of the current paradigm and rebuild the world anew.
The new Renaissance.
The new Renaissance, yeah, you could say that. Second, third industrial revolution, but at least I think the industrial energy revolution that we are starting now, green revolution, is certainly more significant than the coal revolution, and probably more significant than the oil and electricity revolution. So it is really something that will change everything about how human beings live, how they work, how they produce. And power will also follow from this. Again, whoever controls these new technologies, whoever controls the new energy paradigm, is going to control the world. And we see that competition has moved to some extent from infrastructure, which was a debate 3-4 years ago, into the green transformation. China is very focused on this, and the United States is trying to respond. Europe is trying to play a role. I think smaller countries will be very important. They will, in a way, tilt the system in one direction or another. They have to learn how to live in a world that is not built by small countries, but where they can have a lot of agency. In a way, learn how to play by rules that have been set by others.
Right.
But that is a skill that has to be learned. And some countries that have no ability to build the rules, they are still extraordinarily successful. One interesting thing about the world today is that countries that don't build the rules are sometimes more successful playing the game than countries that build the rules. Singapore seems to be more successful playing the rules, and they didn't build them, than the United States
Certainly.
that built them. So it's a complicated world. And Pakistan has become, it's been an interesting development of the past 3 years, a really active country in the debate on climate change and the green transformation. In part because Pakistan is so much in the center as a country that is being impacted by it. But I think politicians here from all parties have been very good at taking advantage of that.
Right, sir. Just concluding remarks from you on the final and also the forum that you will be speaking on with us as well. What do you envision to be the future of international order 50 years from now?
Nothing will be the same. I think we will be living in a world that to us today would look like science fiction. Artificial world where nature will have been abolished, biological nature, physical nature. And the question is, who will build this world?
Right.
And I don't think we have an answer yet. What will it look like, and who will be in charge? I don't think geopolitics will disappear. That's not where we're going. Geopolitics will become more intense, but it will also become more invisible. Because these dynamics that I talk about in the next book of world building, geoengineering, all these words you can use, they always signify that there's a power to some extent behind the scenes that is able to manipulate reality. And for many people, this power won't even be very visible.
Right.
So I think the work of geopolitical analysts is to some extent to expose the hidden variables of power in this technological world.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. And thank you for sharing your answers with us as well. It was an enlightening discourse. We hope to see you again in the next session of Policy Beats.